Hello there, Argumentation fans and students. Welcome to another wonderful video. I was a little lax in making the videos for the last unit, so I might go back and do a couple of those readings in more detail just so you understand what you're getting out of them. But this video is by request. A lot of you have requested this kind of a video, so I think I'm going to do one for every upcoming unit where I just kind of casually, over the next 20 minutes or so, kind of talk to you a little bit about the unit and what the aim is and what we've been doing so far, and kind of give you an orientation to what you're reading for and what you should be looking for in that unit. So, I'm Dr. Steve Yano, Professor Yano, and you're probably in my argumentation class, but if you're not, this video is not going to make a lot of sense to you. So enjoy it if you can, but it's really just kind of about readings and about the different things I'm trying to do in my class. Maybe you're another professor or friend of mine or argumentation teacher, might be useful there. So this video is overview of Unit 4. Now, if we look at the syllabus, bring that up real quick, we've had a number of different units, and let's just kind of go over what these units have done so far. So the first one was like, how have people defined argumentation? And I made this unit in a way to kind of take the Davies essay and the Harper's essay as a kind of a combo of a contemporary kind of view of where argumentation sits. And it's not in a good place. When you read these two things, you should be kind of mystified and a little concerned that these are the things that people are talking about in the nature of argumentation today. Then we look at Tyndale's book, which is our textbook, Rhetorical Argumentation. And what he's trying to do through the entire book is make a case that argumentation can be best theorized from the audience back towards the principles of good argument construction. But he's trying to do it in a way that's more grounded, more, I don't want to say serious, but more structured in the terms like a philosopher might want to use, or more justified in sort of formal terms than the way that rhetoricians typically define argumentation in terms of the classical Athenian tradition, and in terms of the way that Perlman and Albrecht-Stidicke did it, for example. He wants to do it more in terms of an acceptable theory of good argument that can be theorized from the audience, the rhetorical aspect to him, back towards the dialectical aspect, the exchange part, back to the logical aspect, which is the structure of good arguments. So that's what he's doing, is working backwards. Normally people would say, you make the good arguments, then you present them well to your opponent, and you learn how to interact and how to exchange, how to rebut, how to refute. Then you present to the audience. So that becomes last. And he says that's a huge mistake. Brock-Reedy and Wenzel are the two probably most influential American thinkers on defining argument. So that's what we're trying to do, is give you a sense of how has this been dealt with in the past. Unit 2, how do we argue? How does this happen? Well, Tyndale talks about that in 3 and 4 through devices and through kind of sophistic speech kind of stuff where he's trying to remediate the sophists, Plato and Socrates' arch enemies. He's trying to say that there's some value in some of the things that they are doing. And then acceptance frames, we talked about this in the live stream, which is that people generally will want to look for things that are tragic, that we frame things in terms of someone has made a terrible error and must suffer for it, versus, well, people are just generally mistaken. And in a popular one from, I think from you guys from this unit, was where he talked about a theory of argumentation that was based on ethics and based on humanity, a humanistic ethical definition of argument. How do we treat other people? And then Toulmin uses of argument, section 3 is about the warrant and the creation of the warrant, which is what Stephen Toulmin is most known for, is saying the way that people naturally argue, they do not express all their premises. There are premises that will never be expressed. And the warrant is the thing that holds together what you think is true based on your experiences and data. You're like, well, this is what it must be. And it's hard to explain that. Even if you're explaining that, oftentimes you're explaining another claim, which has its own warrant. So the warrant is always unexpressed and hidden. So from him is the reason why we have people say things like, well, I don't know if that argument is well warranted. That is, I can see how you're connecting the dots, but I don't see it as sticking. And then you, of course, move to backing after that. But we didn't get into all the complexities of Toulmin in this course or in this reading, but you can on your own. The book is there and it's free in the library, a digital library. Unit 3 is about mistakes and things like that. And in that one, we talked about chapter 5 which was about the super addressee and who are the people that, when we're addressing an argument, who are we talking to? Who's that audience in there? And that's the first of audience we're going to look at. And then the next is Deborah Tannen has her theory of the argument culture, which is that argument has become a mass-mediated cultural product that is shopped and sold on cable news channels. And it always has the same problems. It's always aggressive. It's always two-sided. And it's always that someone's right and someone's wrong. And she thinks that argumentation is a bad thing. We don't need it. Gerald Graff responds back with 2 cheers to the argument culture, saying that actually it's not the problem with arguments or having an argument culture. It's the problem that people are just not taught how to do this well. And he talks about that in those 8 pages or so that I have you read from his book. So those two go together because he's responding to Tannen. And Tannen is sort of saying argument is something that we might be better off without. And Graff is saying there is actually a way we can redeem argument. Bad argument shouldn't be the representative of argument. And also Graff suggests something that I strongly believe in, is that we shouldn't allow television news cable networks like MSNBC, Fox, and CNN to dominate what we think argumentation looks like. It's a huge waste of time. They're doing it to get you to watch more of their programming, to make money. That's what generates what they do, no matter what their ethical journalism or whatever. Television cable news is very, very unhealthy and very bad, and probably the root of most of Tannen's critique, where she talks about how Holocaust deniers come on CNN to make their case. We got to, look at both sides, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. She's against all of that kind of stuff. Burke's Virtues and Limitations Debunking. I'll probably make a video on that and post it maybe later tonight. Burke is also in the Graff school. He's saying, look, bad argumentation is not a reason why argumentation is bad. Does everybody understand that? It's kind of a nice way of kind of putting it. There's a kind of argumentation called debunking, and Burke's essay is actually really timely because debunking is a scorched earth argumentation where you have to burn down the entire house because you don't like the color of the wallpaper. You have to kill the person's whole family because they said something bad to you. It's like this kind of argumentation. And what he says the problem with debunking is that kind of argumentation, you eliminate a lot of useful conceptions when you attack like that. So the best example I can think today is debates about immigration. So when we say that we're a country of immigrants and immigration should be absolutely free and open and all this kind of left-wing kind of argumentation, and we see Donald Trump as an evil man for enforcing immigration, what we do is we eliminate an incredibly useful part of the argument, which is immigration policy. We probably should have a policy as a country as to what the immigration rules and policies, what it looks like and how we would do it, should be in place. We probably shouldn't just have open, unguarded borders. But the way we might argue against Trump's immigration policy might be a debunking mode where we don't really, where we eliminate a lot of the good elements of it totally. Likewise, people who are really xenophobic, like pro-Trump immigration, like build a wall, close the borders, don't let anybody in who's not going to 100% be American. You're limiting out all kinds of great positive benefits that come from an immigration policy that's a bit looser or open or allows for people to come in for amnesty and things like that. So that's the best example, as Burke says. You don't have to argue 100% scorched earth. And if you do, you're actually damaging the positive benefits of argumentation right there. Next is Hamblin, chapter 1 of Hamblin, the standard treatment of fallacies. Charles Hamblin was the first person to really systematically study the fallacies. Like bandwagon, appeal to pity, appeal to force, begging the question, circular argument. And that's where he kind of lists out and says all these things are violations of a structural norm of good argumentation. And that's his kind of definition of fallacies, is that they do not get us to reason correctly in the correct form on things. And that's been pushed on lately and really criticized in the last 10, 20 years or so. But people still teach this in high school. People still teach this in college. They still teach the fallacies. You might have gotten it in composition or in your philosophy class as complete errors in argument. Hamblin's on board with that. But the Baudry, Pagliari, and Pigliucci article talks about how fallacies, when they exist in real life, are incredibly hard to identify. And even if you can identify them, there's not a lot wrong with them. So that essay is really, I'll be interested to see what you think of that one, because that one talks about how in real life the fallacies are very hard to distinguish. And when you find them, they actually kind of work, which I think is the point of why Hamblin wrote the book in the first place. He's like, look, fallacies work and they shouldn't. So I have to come up with a way that there are errors in structural judgment. But I mean, in the end, the problem with fallacies is that we're lazy. Human beings are lazy, and we want there to be a structural stop sign or a rule that says, you can't argue that way. It doesn't work like that. You have to be vigilant, careful, and examine all the connections of an argument to see if it's good. There's not going to be any kind of like a referee throwing a yellow flag or pulling up a red card to tell you that an argument's bad. There's no argument referee out there. Although there are memes, the fallacy memes where they use the referee. Those are kind of funny. I might put those in the Discord for you guys if you think they might be funny. All right, so Unit 4. Unit 3 was pushing on argument to say maybe we'd be better off without it. There are a lot of problems with it. Unit 4 is saying maybe we've theorized it wrong. So Unit 4's questions are questions that also extend into the next unit, which is, we could say, hashtag argumentation so white. That starts here, but actually the way we're going to push on it, Unit 4, is argument too Western, too philosophical, too based on a concept that is maybe too cerebral and too logical, and maybe needs to be much more spiritual? Or is argumentation something that is too informal and needs some rigor? It needs to be rethought of in a completely different way. Or argumentation is too oral and too written. It privileges the word. It's logocentric, right? Or it's rhetorocentric. Argument has a huge bias towards language and words and not to feeling, spirituality, noises, or light. That's what these are about, and it's a critique of argumentation. So let me walk you through kind of some of the basics of this. Let's look at the Dreyfus first. And I don't know if I need to write this down, but I'm ready to write it down if I need to for you on the screen here. So Dreyfus is a man who studied at a Tibetan Buddhist temple to become a Buddhist monk. He became a Buddhist monk. And he talks about his education there. And in the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, your education is in debate. You debate the sutras, you debate what Buddha said, and you debate the great commentators, and you argue about how is it best to prove that the enlightenment of one being is the enlightenment of all beings, or that suffering doesn't really exist, or that attachment creates the world. These kind of Buddhist theological tropes are the things that they debate. And the way they do it is it's supposed to train you how to reach out to people who aren't Buddhist and maybe try to convert them. Because Tibetan Buddhism is a religion that proselytizes. Buddhism proselytizes for the most part. Anything under Mahayana will proselytize, like you should be enlightened, you should meditate. And the people who do that, the monks and the priests and everybody else, they will try to get you in and teach. They really want to teach what Buddha said. So in this chapter, he talks about, is debate a mode of inquiry? Now, this is a really shift for us to think about argumentation. And the way we thought about it is either a way of solving problems, gathering information, testing information. But it's a mode of inquiry, which means, is debate like the scientific method? Does it generate knowledge? Can I use debate to generate knowledge? Can I use debate to teach? Can I use argumentation to teach? Can I use argumentation to investigate a question? That is, instead of doing an experiment, could we argue out something and then come to a solution that neither one of us had thought of, but comes out in the course of our argument? It's an interesting thing to think about. This happens to you all the time when you're with your friends and you're trying to figure out where to go to dinner, and you guys are all fighting about your favorite place or where you want to go. And eventually you end up settling on a place no one brought up initially because that's like the compromise. That's kind of what we're talking about here. That's a very simple example of what Dreyfus is talking about. But could debate inquire and question in a way to generate its own knowledge? And that's what that chapter is about, the Dreyfus. Next, we have David Fleming. This is a very famous essay. Can pictures be arguments? Think about that for a bit. Let that one sit in your head before you read the essay. Can a picture make an argument? Have you seen a picture in the news or on television, an image maybe? We could talk about television in terms of this too. Or on YouTube, have you seen an image of something horrible that made an argument? I mean, I hate to bring it up, but when we get into the next unit, which you can see is about anti-blackness and anti-racism and racism against black people in the United States, or it's my attempt at doing it. It's not comprehensive at all. We'll talk about that in Unit 5 about my concerns with that unit. When we're talking about on everybody's mind is anti-black racism in the United States, and particularly in the mode of police violence against black people. The image of George Floyd in the Minneapolis policeman standing on his neck. Is that an argument? Is that image an argument? And I want you to keep that in mind when you're reading David Fleming's piece, because Fleming doesn't think pictures can be arguments. They don't meet a standard for that. And I wonder what you guys are going to say about that, because I think it's going to upset you if you think about it in terms of Black Lives Matter and the horrible images that we have gotten in recent years of the unequal treatment under the law that Black Americans have had to face. Are those images arguments, or are they evidence? Maybe you could think of it that way. I'll be interested to see what you have to say. And you don't have to use that example. There are lots of examples where pictures, you might think they're arguments, but Fleming has a system. He's very convincing. He says they're not. And he's started a huge, people are still fighting about this. Franz von Emeren and Rob Grutendorf are two of the founders of the Pragma-Dialectical School of Argumentation. And I have you read their procedure for critical discussion, because they are two who say argumentation, the problem with it needs to be more philosophical, needs to be more structured, and needs to be more dialectical. Now remember, Chris Tyndale is much more interested in rhetorical argumentation. We could say Van Emeren and Grutendorf are interested in dialectical argumentation, i.e. the way that exchange happens between two people who disagree is the focus of the generation of the best kind of theory on that. So this is their rules for critical discussion, and they define argumentation as the resolving of a difference of opinion. Now, what do you think about that definition? That's kind of weird. That's in there. And I wonder what you'll say about that. It's a complicated procedure. I'll probably have to do a video on that one and kind of walk you through how to do a critical discussion. If we were in class, I would have a couple of volunteers try to do it, and you'd be embarrassed and laugh, and people would be like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I'd be like, yep, welcome to critical discussion. It's kind of how it goes, particularly for American students, where an argument just kind of happens like a natural speech kind of function. Like we're highly rhetorical kind of naturally, I feel like. Or it has something to do with how we acquire language and speak about things that are controversial. American cultural attitude. The Dutch are not like this. Dan Sperber and Hugo Mercier are cognitive psychologists, evolutionary psychologists, and philosopher. And they wrote a book called Enigma of Reason, which this book, you're either going to not like it at all, or you're going to be obsessed with it for the rest of your life. That's the reaction. I'm just telling you what students do here. That's the reaction that students give me. They are interested in what counts as reason. How do we know someone's being reasonable? How do we know someone is employing reason? And how do people acquire reason? And they say it's not an evolutionary part of human knowledge or the human mind. They say reason is something else, and it's an adaptation for communication. We invented argumentation. We invented reason because we like to argue. We didn't invent reason because argument is natural. They flipped the script. So wrap your head around that. That's kind of cool. Like the way you define humanity for them is that we're argumentative, talking creatures. So we created reason in order to find new, diverse ways to argue with each other. Pretty fun, kind of cool. The next one, I'll be interested in see this one, because this is an essay that's very controversial. In fact, a new book, the 30th anniversary of this theory, new book just came out on Invitational Rhetoric, which is by Sonia Foss and Cindy Griffin. This is a theory I really like. I've written about it myself a few times. A proposal for invitational rhetoric. This is the essay that says that rhetoric, that argumentation in the rhetorical mode is sexist. It's misogynistic. It's hyper-masculine, aggressive, and domineering. And we need an alternative way to conceive of argument that would be more in line with feminist theory. So I'll be interested to see what you think of Foss and Griffin. This is what we would call a feminist theory of argument. Now, it might not be a good one at all, or you might read it and say, you know what, it needs something else. And I'd be happy to read an essay or hear you speak on a video about what else it might need. So those are the different readings that we're going to go do, and a little summary of those. Now, to finish off this video, let's kind of talk about what Unit 4 is about. What are the structural and cultural problems with argumentation theory? Now, you've been reading argumentation theory pretty steadily in here. And you might have noticed some problems, that most of the authors we've read are white and male, that most everything is based on the Western philosophical canon. Not a lot of people quoting Confucius or anything in there, right? Not a lot of people quoting Indian philosophers. Not a lot of native thought in there, First Peoples, Aboriginal people, or indigenous peoples thought in there. So these things might have bothered you, and you might not have said anything because maybe you're kind of used to that in American universities, Western universities. We're pretty blind to those things. So those problems are definitely there, and we have sort of the feminist response. We also have a spiritual response. And then we have the logocentric response, which is in the Fleming, which is, should arguments be visual? And the Fleming essay is great because he kind of shows how you would argue against that stuff, but he's citing a lot of the people who are saying the pictures can argue and the visuality has a role. But then there's also things I've left out that aren't necessarily in the reading, which is like something you might want to consider in this unit. Can a song be an argument? That's kind of interesting, right? Now, songs are not purely images. They have a lot of meter and rhythm and sound and stuff, but can a song serve as an argument? Think about political music. Do you have some political music that you really like political songs? Think about the 1960s in the United States. Lots of political music. Think about Bob Dylan, right? There's a good example of political. Or Woody Guthrie. And then in hip-hop, Public Enemy. NWA had some political music, right? But this is all my era. Who are the figures in your era? I mean, that's all like the music of the 90s for me, like when I was in high school. I'm dating myself here. Please don't think I'm old and stupid. Now I just told you I was in high school in the 1990s. Eeh. Gosh, I'm old. I never thought I'd be this old either. It's kind of weird. So anyway, think about who are the musicians now you would say are political songwriters, and can you prove, using the kind of things in this unit, that those songs are arguments? Think about underrepresented kinds of theory here. We're looking at it from religion and from feminism and from logocentrism, but you can also bring in your own and say, very much like this, is there another way to conceptualize argumentation? So I hope you find that interesting. That's kind of where I was hoping to wind up on this video, and it's only about 20 minutes long. Discussion in the Discord. Everything that you want to say, ask, you're worried about, you don't understand, just put a comment in the Discord, in the classroom channel or assignment channel. I'll respond, another classmate will respond. That is meant to be the place where we chat and where we kind of come alive as a class because we can't meet in person. That's what the purpose of that is. I don't want it to be kind of a stagnant place where I just post and people post when they're concerned about assignments. We should chat in there. And the cool thing is you can leave a note in there, and hours later somebody can come back and respond to it. So check Discord every day and you'll see it works kind of like a discussion board, but it's more vibrant than a discussion board. So, we'll put a comment in there, a question, anything at all, a thought, a quote from the readings, anything you want to chat about. I don't just teach this because I was assigned it. I teach it because I love it. And I love talking about this stuff with you. And hopefully this Unit 4 orientation has helped you understand a little bit better the readings and where we're kind of going in the class. Next, we're going to look at anti-Black racism in terms of argumentation. It's kind of a new idea for me, sadly, but with all the George Floyd stuff, I didn't think we could ignore it. But that'll be Unit 5. But here in Unit 4, we're just looking at these kind of criticisms. So think about what the limits of what an argument can actually be, or what kind of text can we look at. Is the design of a car, an argument? Is the color of a car an argument? That's where we are in this unit. So what are the appropriate and necessary limits for looking at something as argumentation? Does it have to be textual? Does it have to be in a language? Does it have to be spoken? Or can it be colors on a canvas, a pyrotechnic display, or a song? And also think about, is our conception of argument sexist in some way? Or is it not spiritual? Is it too cerebral and too logical? Is it too Western mind-body dichotomy? Is there a way of argumentation where we could have it through our entire body, like an embodied experience or spiritual experience, like the Buddhists talk about argumentation in Tibetan Buddhism? And that's the Dreyfus piece. So lots of questions, not a lot of answers. Looking forward to the conversation. As always, let me know if you have questions, and more videos to come.